hope I can get up on this. Yeah, I'm liberal enough.
It's the McDevitt chair.
Well, chair. I brought a few little notes because I can't work without notes. Trivia begins right now because I'm going to share with you some trivia. Not really. I would like you to think as I sort of talk about this faith journey of mine. My kind of look on this is a kind of who done it? What's behind all this? It's a faith story, but since it's a faith story, it always leads into a kind of mystery. Who's running the show here? And I think my story is one that kind of leans into who's running the show. So obviously I'm going to talk about myself, but I'm really intending to talk about who done it. So myself. Grew up in a family of 10 children. I'm one of 10. And my recollection around the dinner table was that we always had a jar of peanut butter, because if the soup and the spaghetti and all did not suffice, you could always get some peanut butter. But we often ran out of bread. So I had the habit of taking a knife and digging into the peanut butter jar and then licking off the knife and putting the knife back in the jar. So isn't that terrible? So my dad would look at me and say, sharing is really wonderful, but some of the things you're trying to share, let's get you over that. So that was kind of the beginning of a notion of sharing. It grew a little bit when my mom, as I got to be high school age, we all had to go out and sell newspapers or work in the local grocery store, so to bring home a little bit of change to help keep the soup on the table. That was literally true. We had to contribute. So I'm about 14 years old when my mom comes, and I had brought home, $1.50 and change, and it went into the cookie jar to help support the family. So one of these times my mom puts it in the cookie jar, and then she keeps 2 quarters on the side, and she gives me 2 quarters, 25-cent pieces for you. I said, Mom, for me? All for you, but don't tell your dad. And I thought, what's this about sharing? I can't tell. I said, no, don't tell your dad. I'll explain to you later on, because my dad was the one who really kept, charge of the cookie jar and all that. 2 quarters for me. I mean, I had 4 or 5 boxes of popcorn, went to 2 movies, invited a couple of my friends. That was another experience of sharing. Sharing what you have. Well, as time goes on, I'm getting to 8th grade and wondering what's going to happen next. So Sister Mercedes, I'm sure some of you have had this happen to you in different ways, decides that I should go to the local Jesuit high school. So I told her, there's no way, sister, there is no way. My mom and dad, we've talked about this. There were 2 brothers older than me who went to public high schools and all. I said, they can't afford it. She said, that's not a question. She said, you're going to go to a Jesuit high school. I said, there's no way. She said, there is a way. Every Saturday afternoon, I was called in by Sister Mercedes for 2 hours of lessons on how to get into Loyola High School, Lakefield, Baltimore. Well, all my friends were going to, play basketball or go up the park and whatever. I was called to. What she did is she had all the past 20 exams from Loyola High School, which she drilled me on, until my head was throbbing. I mean, we have computers now where you can store all this stuff, but I had to store it in my head. I took the entrance exam to Loyola High School. I spit out, literally spit out. I knew the answers before I knew the questions. And I got a scholarship to Loyola High School. Wow. Who is running the show here? Sister Mercedes? It wasn't me. There was no intelligence involved at all. In fact, if you were intelligent, you probably wouldn't have passed the exam. I just spit out these answers. Well, I get to Loyola High School, and as I go through high school, in those days, towards my senior year, we had 13 young Jesuits, okay? Seminarians, scholastics, we call them, teaching us. And I kind of really got to think what kind of life these guys live. So one Saturday afternoon, we're preparing stage props for a dramatic performance. And we have 5 or 6 of the young Jesuits and maybe 10 of us juniors, seniors. And we're preparing these props. And the Jesuits say to us, you guys can continue to work, but we have to go to chapel. You know, we could finish this on Monday. You don't have to. We say, go to chapel. What's that all about? So we sort of circled the building, got to the side of the Jesuit residence, looking in the window, and these guys prayed into chapel. And they're there for about 5 minutes. Typical Jesuit prayer. Okay? And then they move out of chapel. And it's a Saturday afternoon. We wonder, well, what's going to happen next? Around comes a station wagon, a van. Out from the back kitchen door comes a basket of bread and chicken, case of beer, some Coke. They load up the vans and they head off. All 13 of them, can you imagine? All together. They're going out for the weekend to the mountains in Maryland or out to the ocean or so. And we got talking to one another. You say, you know, this is something else, this life. And to this day, I'll never forget the 2 things that impressed me. They worked so hard all week for us, for others. Correcting exams, teaching, doing extracurriculars, day and night, you know. Sometimes you could see in the morning they hadn't really had a good sleep because they were correcting papers. But when they wanted to relax, you know, get away from it all, they did it all together. And that stuck in my head. Serving others and living together is what led me to think about becoming a Jesuit. And then only about a year later, I entered the novitiate. I'll be honest with you, it was nothing other than hero worship. I didn't know who done it. I had no idea that I was being led by, you know, some people like the way Babe Ruth hits them out, you know, the way Yogi Berra catches them. I just admired this kind of way of living. Well, I hope in the course of the years it's got to be a little more than hero worship, but that's what it was. And I think that's not bad. Whoever done it was kind of working through these kind of human emotions, these, you know, hero worship, working through hero worship to bring it up to a little something higher. Well, we go on. After 2 years in the novitiate, I'm studying, can you imagine, Latin and Greek for 2 years. I mean, we don't have to do that anymore as Jesuits, I don't think, but we did that. So I'm studying Greek, and Father Hayne Martin is my Greek professor, and he happens to have a master's degree also in mathematics, and he has an avid interest in astronomy and a good college education in astronomy. So while he's teaching us Greek, he used to get distracted. He was a very passionate teacher. He'd get distracted, he starts scratching his head. I think he died of lead poisoning because he scratched his head with a pencil. And he'd say, gentlemen, do you realize that tomorrow is the beginning of spring? Do you know what that means? Oh. He says he went to the blackboard and he traced the celestial equator, the ecliptic, you know, the sun, the earth, what the beginning of spring meant. About a week later, he'd get distracted again. He'd be doing one of the Greek odes. He'd kind of dance them even. And he'd say, do you realize that we first got the radio signals from Jupiter? And he'd be talking about this. And so one day I get called in. And I'm nervous because, you know, every 2 weeks we went in about our Greek themes. But this was an extra session. I thought, oh dear. I walk in, he says, Mr. Coyne, why are you so nervous? I said, Father, I don't know what this is all about. He said, don't worry, sit down. Your Greek themes are not the best I've ever seen, but you know. He said, why are you sitting on the edge of your chair whenever I talk about astronomy? Now, here's a teacher for you. I said, Father, I love it. Everything you say, He said, well, we got to get you reading. And then he leans back and he says, and this is exactly what he said, damn it, we have this strange rule that you cannot, as a young man studying, take any books out of the library except in ancient history or Greek and Latin literature. You got to do what you're doing, you know? And he says, that's the damnedest, stupidest. You got a young man who has this appetite for learning, doesn't matter what it is, learning, whether it's music or sculpture or playing tennis or whatever it is, he's got a passion to do something. You got to feed it while he's hungry. And he said, oh, wait a minute. He picks up the phone. He calls, he says, Marjorie, I have a young man here. Would you mind if he used my library card? We used to go into Reading, Pennsylvania. You know where that is, great. It was near our novitiate, to teach the kids on the street. You know, we take a little piece of chocolate and we get them to come up and get chocolate. Then we'd say, sit down, and we jam the Bible at them. But I had this card. I went into the Reading Public Library, picked up a couple books, brought them home. Father Martin gave me a flashlight so that I could pull the blankets over my head at night, literally. You know, because this was forbidden. It was forbidden fruit, but it was good fruit. So I went through that stage, you know, of being encouraged to do what, you know, I had a passion to do. Well, who's running the show? What's happening here? I had no big plans. I didn't plan to become a Jesuit. It was hero worship. I didn't plan to study astronomy. I had a professor who saw that I had an interest. What's going on? You know, what's happening here? So finally, I did my master's, my master's degree in mathematics, and so the provincial got hold of the fact that I did a pretty good job. So he said, instead of teaching during Regency, you go do a PhD in math. I said, fine, Father, I'd love to, but you know, I really have this interest in astronomy. We don't need astronomers. We need physicists, mathematicians to teach in our schools and all. So don't you forget about that astronomy. Who got you interested in astronomy? I said, you know. So a week later, I get a letter from the provincial that says, we would like you to do a PhD in astronomy. Well, he never gave the reason, but I found out later. The reason was they had gotten together and thought a little bit. It's rare among, you know, Jesuit superiors to actually get together and no, I can't. Sorry about that, John, but you know, it does happen. So they got together and they said, you know, the current director of Georgetown College Observatory, which was the only PhD program we had in astronomy in the country, is 65 years old. When this kid, me, you know, does a degree in astronomy, studies theology, does tertianship, gets through his prayer life, the guy that's running the observatory is going to be 75. So we should really plan to have a successor. So I was put in studies in astronomy, which I loved, in order to become director of Georgetown College Observatory. Who's running the show? Who done it? So I get my PhD in astronomy. I go do my tertianship, our third year novitiate. I do a sabbatical year of studies. I come back to the province. Georgetown College Observatory does not exist. They've closed it for good reasons. That's a whole nother story. Okay? So here I am trained for a job that doesn't exist. So Provincial and I have a talk. He said, George, you know, I know it's the way things happen, but we'd like you to teach, you know, physics or math in one of our 28 colleges or universities. I said, fine, Father, I'd love to. But, you know, I had this sabbatical year out in the University of Arizona, and they would like me to come back for another, you know, year of research. You know, could I do that? Because they're interested. I did my research on the surface of the moon long before the Ranger program, the Apollo program, and they're developing these big telescopes in order to map the moon. Would you mind if I went and spent another year? Because they really were like, oh, no, do, but, you know, come back here in a year. So I went there, and lo and behold, you know, things developed, and they offered me a faculty position in the provincial sees at this. Then the Vatican Observatory, there were about 5 Jesuits there at the time. This is in the late 1960s. There are 5 or 6 Jesuits there, and they, you know, they know about me, having done my PhD, and they say, you know, University of Arizona, we need them here at the Vatican Observatory. Again, they got together and thought. And what they thought was, and they told me this, I went for an interview, they said, George, you're more valuable to us there than you would be here, at least for now. Because you have all these professional contacts, you know, access to big telescopes. Lord knows that, you know, we could collaborate with you, and as it turned out, that was a great decision. So I have a kind of a semi-permanent position at the University of Arizona. What happens then is that I get very interested in the astronaut program. It was the first time that NASA wanted scientists as astronauts. Up until that time, they were all either engineers or pilots, etc., which was necessary for the beginning of the program. But now they wanted scientists. So I had done my research on the lunar surface. I thought, God, that would be great. So again, I get in touch with the provincial, and we have a discussion about it. And he said, you know, I don't know who's twisting whose arm here, but, you know, we started out that you would teach physics and astronomy in one of our universities, and now, you know, a Vatican Observatory can't get you, and you're out there in Arizona, now you want to go to the moon. So he says, let me think about it. So I get a little letter about 2 weeks later saying, George, I'd love to have you go to the moon, but if I let you go, everyone will want to go. Typical Jesuit spirit. If I let you do it, everybody will do it. So at any rate, what happens? I get finally to the Vatican Observatory because all of a sudden, the director at that time dies, very tragically, and the superiors decide that I should come and direct the observatory. So I said, fine, but I have these NASA grants, NSF grants. I'm director at the University of Arizona at the time. I was directing the observatories there. He said, well, take a year, but we want you to come to the Vatican Observatory. So in that time, I was going back and forth between Rome and Tucson, Arizona, where we had our research institute, and they were happy times. But finally, I become director. Well, I became director by being appointed by John Paul I. That's quite a trick. I mean, he was only around as Pope for 32 days, I think that's the exact number. And he died, and he appointed me director. So a lot of my friends, mostly Jesuit friends, you may have heard me say this, if you have a Jesuit as a friend, you do not need an enemy. Just take it as it comes. So my Jesuit friend said, why did John Paul I die after he was poisoned? There was a plot. The job was just so tremendous, he just succumbed, which it is, of course. No, he rethought some of his appointments at the end of 30 days. He had a heart attack and went to the Lord. So I contributed unknowingly to that. Well, so the journey goes on. John Paul II is Pope. So I always, I'm kind of proud of it. I came in with John Paul II and I went out with John Paul II. I had 28 years with John Paul II as Pope. I resigned the year after he died, within a few months after he died, but it was all in the plans. It had nothing to do with that. A great Pope for the Vatican Observatory and for science, really a great Pope. When I first approached him about opening a research institute in Tucson, Arizona, he said, I think it's a great idea. Let me talk to my advisors. So he did, and he came back and, he said, to be honest with you, Father Coyne, he said, I think it's a great idea, but, my advisors say, this young American, he's going to take the whole shooting match to America. And I said, Your Holiness, that's not true. We're opening a research institute. And to this day, our administrative center, our computer center, our main library, we have a great meteorite collection with a laboratory. A lot of research is happening at Castel Gandolfo, but we could no longer observe the stars there. Sky was too bright, we're too close to Rome, sky pollution and all of that. And he realized it right away, and he said, done. Give me a little memo about, what the budget, considerations are, or get it to the Cardinal. And he was supportive right away and has been and was ever since, as have subsequent popes. Why did we open a research institute in Tucson, Arizona, rather than anywhere else? I submitted 3 possibilities. I don't have to go into them. But the long experience I had there, and 2 other Jesuits, one, Martin McCarthy, 10 years ahead of me at the Vatican Observatory, had spent several years of research in Tucson, Arizona. It was a really growing center. It's one of the chief centers in the world now for astronomy. Richard Boyle from the New England province had done his PhD dissertation with telescopes out there. So we already had a background. And so we opened a research institute in Tucson, Arizona. Who done it? The kind of faith journey I'd like to share with you in concluding this is, I don't necessarily pride myself on this, but I do think it's an important ingredient of anyone's faith journey, is to be open. You have to be decisive yourself. You have to discern what you can do best. You have to share this with people, whether they're religious superiors or otherwise. You have to share what you think your talents and where you could serve. But you have to be open, because things don't happen according to plan. They just don't. They certainly did in my case. I don't think any one of these steps in my life up until today happened because it was planned. In fact, it happened because it was not planned. From the time I put that knife in the peanut butter, I didn't know what sharing was until I kind of got to understand from my parents. I had a sister who, a religious nun who taught me in 8th grade, who thought I should go to a Jesuit high school. I didn't plan that. Nobody planned it because it couldn't be planned, but it happened, And then I see these young Jesuits, and I kind of have a hero worship of them. I didn't plan to be a Jesuit. I didn't spend time in chapel praying about whether I should be a Jesuit or not. Well, I did, but only 5 minutes. So my story is briefly that. And I've been turned on by a local Jesuit, Brit Zanoni, to Yogi Berra. recalling, you got young people don't know Yogi Berra, but John Yogi Berra, tell them again.
Yeah.
Great catcher for the New York Yankees.
Yeah, not Baltimore, but New York.
Not Baltimore, New York Yankees. But great catcher and manager of the New York Yankees, known for his little sayings, And one of his little sayings was, a manager when he was a young player looked at him and said, "Yogi, think." And Yogi looked back at him and said, "Think? How the hell are you going to think and hit at the same time?" And that's kind of a little bit of my story. I didn't think my way through this. I just hit. Take the chances and hit. Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you so very much, Father Coyne. We'll take a few-minute break. People are invited to write down questions that they have for Father Coyne, and then we'll pull a few out and let him respond to them. So, thank you.
Just easy ones.
Just easy ones. All right, so we are now going to begin our question and answer portion of Quinty and Coco. And thank you for those who asked questions.
I don't have to kneel down before you, do I?
No, gosh, no. Please no. Yeah, please sit. There was one question, who did it? But I'm not sure if you have an answer for that one or not.
Well, at this stage of my life, I do, yeah. God did it. I'm not, hesitant to say that. But God did it, and through other events and people. God didn't hit me over the head, or, He may have been looking down when I took that knife out of the peanut butter jar and stuff. Working through my parents, my siblings, my teachers, my friends, young Jesuits. God, to me, works very quietly. He's always there, he or she always there, kind of behind the scenes, let's put it that way. Not demanding, not pushing, but kind of getting other people to tickle your interest. Yeah, ultimately God did it. I mean, my faith journey is definitely, at this stage of my life, it's a great feeling of thanks to God that you worked in my life through so many different people and events. No doubt about it.
Thank you, Father Coyne. Another person asked, your faith story emphasizes a Jesuit-based faith from first to last. What of those who started and remained non-Jesuit? What of those who became antithetical to the Jesuits?
I don't know how you could be any more antithetical to some Jesuits than I am. Jesuits come in all kinds of sizes, shapes, and all. Is there something about the Jesuits as such where someone would be antithetical, either in the idea area or in the practical area? Let's, individual Jesuits, you don't have to point out to me, honestly, not locally, but, in my career as a Jesuit, we come in all sizes and shapes, but I can't imagine, as a Jesuit, any real Jesuit creating a kind of anti-attitude from anyone. An atheist, a Presbyterian, a Martian, a true Jesuit just does not, I can't imagine a Jesuit drawing that kind of reaction. I mean, through my life, I've had conversations with Carl Sagan, I've had conversations with Richard Dawkins, with Fred Hoyle, who are root basic atheists, okay? but extremely friendly and productive conversations. No sort of, how could you ever believe that? How could you ever live the kind of life you're living? None of that. So I find it difficult, to be honest, with that question as to, unless someone wants to follow up with it. What do I say to those who are antithetical to Jesuits? I say, I don't understand. I just don't understand. Maybe, I'm blind because I am a Jesuit. I can tend to be defensive, but I don't understand.
Is that good? Were you finished? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm
Okay.
finished unless someone wants to.
Oh, okay. I won't be following up on it. I don't know how to. Another person asked Father Coyne, what do you value the most about being a Jesuit?
I think it's pretty clear. I seem to be pausing, but fellow Jesuits, no doubt about it. It's the thing I most treasure. Community, being with other Jesuits. And again, it's not that there are any halos over any of these guys, including myself, but I see God working through the people I live with in Jesuit community. The thing I most treasure is fellow Jesuits. And obviously in human affairs, some more than others. That's obvious to anyone, right? But all of them, come as they will. Living in community with Jesuits is, in fact, the times that I've only had a part of my time as a Jesuit where I did not live in a Jesuit community, but in a parish. When I first went to Tucson, Arizona, there were no Jesuits. So I lived in a parish there, and I immediately sensed, when I first went there, I was only a month ordained, but I immediately sensed something different here. I lived with 4 other priests, but I didn't live with them the way I live with fellow Jesuits. I didn't say that right away. There was not that, there was no, certainly no hostility or anything like this, but there was not that common, binding of spirituality, service for others, kind of even intellectual exchanges, regardless of what your field of interest were. There's something about it, I'm proud of it, and I can say it, I know of no other religious group or any other group that I'd be happier to be with than fellow Jesuits. There's a kind of a bonding. A lot of these priests live very, very lonely lives. I couldn't live it. I couldn't live that kind of life in a, sort of a permanent way. I need to go to the liturgy every so often with my fellow Jesuits. I need to have a drink with them. I need to sit down and have a meal with them on a regular basis. Living, praying, working with fellow Jesuits is what does it for me.
Thank you again. One other question that a student asked, and I make sure I ask this one, says Neil Tyson deGrasse, is that the correct pronunciation? deGrasse has a new TV show that premiered a few weeks ago. Do you have any plans for an up-and-coming TV series?
No, I don't. Would anyone like to produce one? I know Neil pretty well. We've been friends over a number of years. In fact, we put on sort of a 2-man show at the American Museum Hayden Planetarium for the benefactors of the Vatican Observatory years ago. He's great. He's a very good scientist, very good person, family man. In fact, I invited him to come here in our series of talks, and we had a friendly discussion about it. He said, George, the time, I'm really busy now, obviously. He said, the time I have free, I need to spend with my wife and kids, which revealed a guy who, really has a soul. The Cosmos series, I'm not thrilled by. Not because of him, but I don't think it's up to snuff. And I'm not saying that as a scientist only. I think the production is not. The science is accurate, but not exciting. And science has to be exciting. And I don't know, that's a side comment. That's free.
I think we have time for one more question. One person asked, some would say you are a hero. You spoke about some of the heroes in your life. How do you react to that?
I don't. I mean, I don't sense that. I'm me, a hero. I do what I do. I mean, you know, I have to follow up on Jesuit community and living with Jesuits, and the thing that really makes my life a happy one is being a Jesuit with Jesuits. But I've never met a real Jesuit hero in that sense of an individual who to me stands out from humanity. We're in it together. So I don't sense we're heroes. The 18 to 20 Jesuits, John, that are here at Moyne, we're heroes together. We don't attempt to kind of stand out of the crowd. If we do, it's because of talents that God has given us and all that. So we don't kind of hide behind one another. But I think if there is a hero worship any place here on campus, it should be to the Jesuits in the plural. The common effort that we're making here is what is to be. That's what happened to me, as I said, in my high school years. It wasn't, I can't, in fact, point out any one of those 13 Jesuits that I, was attracted to more than, it was the common living together and dedicated to others that really turned me on. And if that's seen here on the Moyne campus with the Jesuits, all the better for it. That would make all of us very happy. And on other campuses, we're not any different.
Well, thank you very much, Father Coyne. If we could have another round of applause of thanks. Thank you for your stories and your questions. I think they've given us all a lot to think about, to reflect on, and to pray about. So this, again, as I mentioned earlier, is the last koinonia and Cocoa of the school year.
Oh.
Thank you again for that. We will pick up next semester in the fall, I suppose in September. Date to be determined. So thank you again, and please enjoy any refreshments that are left over.
Good. And you won't have to put up with another coin. You've had it.
You're going to stay for trivia night?
No, John. I've already done my trivia.
Is that still like that quickly?